If I was asked to describe Call of Duty Black Ops' campaign using only one word, I'd choose intense. And if I had to use two, I'd pick extremely intense. It is very full on from start to finish, to the point it will perhaps be too much for some, and that might be why I've always considered the game's second level, Vorkuta, to be its best. It shares many similarities with the missions it precedes in terms of structure, pacing, and set-piece design, but because it appears so early on in the campaign, and because it's really entertaining, it perhaps leaves a more lasting impression than most others do. Given this is the second level in Black Ops' campaign, there's not a whole lot of setup to get through prior to Vorkuta beginning. You play as Alex Mason, a CIA operative and part of a team sent to Cuba during the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, tasked with assassinating the country's leader, Fidel Castro. The operation seemingly goes exactly according to plan as you manage to eliminate him, but unfortunately, it all turns out to be for naught. Mason stays behind so that his squad are able to escape, at which point it's revealed you actually dispatched a body double, with the real Castro revealing himself before handing you over to the Soviet Union to be imprisoned. Throughout all of this, you're also being questioned in the present by a shadowy figure who seems to believe something untoward happened sometime during the game's campaign. This continued questioning in the present is used to set up Vorkuta's story.
Right.
Where did Dragovich take you?
Vorkuta. I had to fight. Just to survive.
What happened in Vorkuta, Mason?
And Viktor Reznov is immediately reintroduced to the series after. If you've played World at War previously, you'll know exactly who he is. The addition of Reznov is a welcome one, and his mannerisms have been pared back a little from his theatricality in World at War, which I think was the right decision. Even with that being the case, in some ways he's still more memorable here, thanks to him being the main driver behind the 8 steps to freedom you need to complete to escape. It's a lovely way of framing Vorkuta, and their inclusion makes the level all the more memorable as a result. After using a staged prison fight to rob a guard of his keys, you're introduced to the first of the aforementioned 8 steps you need to complete in order to leave the hellhole you find yourself in.
Reznov.
Mason. Every journey begins with a single step.
This is step 1! Now, we take Vorkuta!
Before you then begin making your way to the surface, this is a good time to talk about the level structure, as there's a very clear blueprint most featured in Black Ops tend to follow. Almost always there's up to 5 minutes of build-up using a variety of scripted sequences, and then everything goes mad for the remainder, with little in the way of pacing once the action begins. This makes the campaign, for me, feel too intense at times, and having played World at War again recently, it came as a bit of a surprise when I revisited Black Ops, as developer Treyarch generally did a decent job of managing their first title's intensity. Vendetta in World at War, another mission starring Reznov, is a great example, and there's plenty more somber moments mixed in with the rest of World at War's more bombastic sequences. Vorkuta just about gets away with it because it appears so early on, but its structure is nevertheless symptomatic of the issues the game's campaign has as a whole. If it was a mission which appeared towards Black Ops' end, I think its impact would be lessened because of the feelings of exhaustion the game can sometimes elicit. I still haven't finished my recent attempted playthrough, as by about the 10th level I was starting to get fatigued by how ridiculously non-stop it all is. Completing step 2, ascending from darkness using an elevator, you find yourself out in the open, cowering behind a coal truck. I wonder whether Treyarch still had their minds halfway in World War II while putting this section together, as it is very much like the D-Day landings included in other titles, as you slowly make your way forward while under heavy machine gun fire as countless allies are cut down around you. Having to peek out to eliminate guards as you progress does add some variety to what might feel like a very familiar set piece, but it's actually the visual side of things here which stands out most. I remain amazed by how good Black Ops looks, considering it was released in 2010, with fires raging around you, smoke and particle effects from them lingering in the air, and dust being kicked up by gunfire, and this is praise which can be levelled at the majority of Vorkuta. It is a gritty story about escaping from a frankly awful place. Note the general lack of colour throughout, which certainly furthers that idea, and this area in particular really nails the dirty, unpleasant vibe Treyarch were no doubt striving for. Step 4 is to unleash the Horde.
What about you, Reznov? For our plan to work, we need every man to play his part.
Step 4. Unleash the Horde.
I will rally them in!
While step 3, which somewhat counterintuitively comes next, is to rain fire. You do this by using a slingshot to destroy enemy emplacements in the distance, and it is okay. Again, like your push through the coal yard, it's more about what's happening around you that is truly striking, as the Horde arrives and you watch endless prisoners pour out into the complex. From here on out, Vorkuta really begins to get into its stride, with a lot more gunplay featured. You fight your way through a couple of short encounters with Reznov and co before completing step 5, Skewer the Winged Beast. This step always struck me as the strangest due to your allies' supreme belief that a helicopter would definitely arrive on the scene, and while it crashing into a nearby structure is quite spectacular, I would have liked there to have been a little more gameplay behind the idea rather than simply aiming once and firing. Although, I suppose given the breakneck pace Vorkuta keeps for the duration of its runtime, it does make sense. You're taking part in a prison escape, and so constantly moving forwards perhaps better matches the level's context. Circle strafing a helicopter for a minute or two or more while attempting to destroy it would eliminate any sense of urgency. Heading back indoors, you reach the longest uninterrupted stretch of gameplay. If it wasn't included, I'd be hard pressed to say Vorkuta was anything other than average, as by this point you'll likely be 10 to 15 minutes into the mission without really having engaged with it in the traditional Call of Duty style. I wish there were a few more sections like it, as it does make this part of Vorkuta feel more dynamic than anything which comes prior. Before this segment, you essentially move from set piece to set piece, and if you're a modern Call of Duty skeptic, like I am to some degree, you could make the claim that you've done little other than move between one highly choreographed spectacle after another. In my view, the best Call of Duty missions weave that spectacle in with the more usual Call of Duty affair, and up until this moment, you could argue that hasn't really been the case, and so the mission suffers as a result. I wouldn't argue that myself, however, and like I mentioned earlier, that is definitely down to Vorkuta appearing towards the start of the game's campaign. Continuing your push inside, you fight your way upstairs, clear the area, and are attacked by tougher enemies wielding shotguns.
There! The photos for Sudan needs! Hold on it! Keep me covered!
Before you then have to hold off another gaggle of guards who arrive on the scene. Your enemy feels more reactive here than at any other time, and events have a nice ebb and flow to them as you battle your way inside before you have to avoid being pushed back yourself. It also sets things up well for what follows. Just as it feels like you may be on the verge of getting overwhelmed, you're ready for step 6, wield a fist of iron, as you pick up a minigun. Now, after being under the cosh for a good while, Treyarch puts the power back into your hands as you complete step 7, raise hell. Is this sequence absolutely absurd? Yes. Is it also a lot of fun? Also yes. Trucks explode, buildings crumble, and enemies fall in a hail of gunfire as you slowly stomp your way through the area. It verges on the absurd, there's no doubt about that. But Black Ops' campaign does, not always successfully, tread the line between the sublime and the ridiculous, and so I can't really mark the minigun portion of Vorkuta down too much, as it is in keeping with the game's tone. Finally, it's time to complete the last step, freedom, as you leave the prison for good.
The door will not hold them forever. We do not have much time. Within this shrine, to the hypocritical decadence of our Vorkuta's leaders, lays the key to step 8.
Freedom.
Riding a motorbike to safety is Treyarch's answer to the ending of Modern Warfare 2's Cliffhanger, which featured a similar section during which you race to safety aboard a snowmobile. You can shoot but don't really have to aim, and as long as you stay on the intended path, you'll have few issues getting through it. I do prefer Black Ops' take on it though. Doing something as simple as opening up the surrounding environment makes it feel like a more open experience, even if it isn't at all, and it's much more engaging in terms of what's going on around you. If Cliffhanger's version proved that the concept could work, even if it is a little bit bonkers, then Vorkuta's rendition refines it. Reaching the end of the mission, you leap on board a passing train, Reznov bids you farewell, perhaps for the last time, and proceedings draw to a close.
Jump, Mason, jump! Go, Mason, go!
Your turn! Come on! Step 8, Reznov! Freedom!
For you, Mason! Not for me!
Reznov!
Vorkuta is an incredibly entertaining level, and while it feels almost too over the top at times, it can mostly be forgiven as it's included in a campaign which is itself quite over the top. Stick a similar mission into Treyarch's previous title, World at War, and I'd not be such a fan, as it wouldn't fit well at all, but within the context of Black Ops, it slots in perfectly. It also has the good fortune of appearing early on in the campaign, before the fatigue some might feel from the game's extraordinary level of action begins to set in, and this also helps it stand out where it may not have if it were featured later on. It's very entertaining, it throws pacing mostly out of the window, which works better than expected, and it being framed around the 8 steps is a novel concept. You could absolutely argue that it lacks subtlety, but even with that being the case, I still believe it to be the best mission in Call of Duty Black Ops. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and CIA operatives. If you enjoyed the video, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know your thoughts, as it all helps the channel grow, and fingers crossed, we'll catch up again soon.